Go and get started. All right, folks, it's time for us to get started. We're glad that you guys are here. Hope you're having a really great week. Looking forward to our Bible study time tonight. We're going to continue teaching my class here in just a couple minutes. We have two young guys who are going to lead us in some songs. If you're visiting with us at Hoover tonight, we welcome you. We're so glad you're here. Hope you'll come back on Sunday if you can. We'll have classes for all ages at 9 o'clock and worship at 10. And we're looking forward to that. So Landon Weimer and Miles Blankenship are our two song leaders tonight. And I'm really looking forward to their leading these songs.
I'm going to be singing Blue Skies and Rainbows. Blue skies and rainbows and sunbeams from heaven are what I can see when my Lord is living in me. I know that Jesus is well and alive today. He makes his home in my heart. Nevermore will I be all alone since he promised me that we never will part. Tall mountains, green valleys, the beauty that surrounds me, how make me aware of the one who made it all. Know that Jesus is well and alive today. He makes his home in my heart. Nevermore will I be all alone since he promised me that we never were apart.
I will be singing number 38. God is an awesome God. God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above. His wisdom, power, and love. God is an awesome God. God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above. Wisdom, power. God is an awesome God.
Great job, guys. Appreciate that so very much. Fine young men. I want to share just a few announcements with you. We will pray together, and then we will have our class here. Welcome all of you again. We're glad you're here. There are printed announcements that include our care lines on them on the tables as you come into the church building. So I hope you picked up one of those. I'm not going to go through everybody on here. I don't think that I've got any updates on any of these on here. So just pray for these folks. We have anybody we need to add to our care lines? Anybody else that you want us to pray for? Nobody? Okay. One thing that I want to mention, Kyle wanted me to mention to you especially, is that about our family skate day this Saturday at the Roller Motion Skate Center in Bessemer. Done that, I don't know, 2 or 3 times before, I guess. A couple years ago was the last time we did it, and did it for 2 or 3 years in a row. It's a lot of fun. Hope you will consider coming from 9:45 to 11:45. Just going to be us there for those 2 hours. There will be other people who come in after that, but they will just open it up to our group for a couple hours. A lot of fun, and so it's right there off of exit 6. Get on 459, get off at exit 6, go to the right. I don't know, what is that? Probably a couple miles, maybe. It's on the left. So it's pretty convenient, and it'll be a lot of fun. So I hope you will plan on being there. Remember the bridal shower for Kendall and Dakota this Sunday from 2:30 to 4. So that is coming up very soon. And I think that is all. Anything else? Okay, let's pray together, and then I'm going to start my class with you. Lord, thank you so much for being good and gracious and kind and patient. Thank you for giving us this time to be together tonight, to enjoy not only just being with one another, but also to reflect on some things that have a spiritual consequence. And in this class I'm teaching tonight, I pray that as we reflect on the world we live in, that we will just be more equipped to share the gospel with people, and that we will be aware of the culture as it changes, so that we can present your gospel, your good news to the world in a way that's effective and winsome, and we'll be able to make a difference in this world. Thank you so much for blessing us with the opportunity to talk to you. We do pray for Dean Kendrick, for Janet Spivey, Tim Hethcox, for Haley Stripling and the loss of her mom, and for that family, for Jean Anderson, for Karen Bowers and her family and the loss of her mom, for Tiffany Roberts, that her doctor visit in St. Louis will give her some answers, for Janet Batchelor, Rebecca, Rachel, that family as they lost a loved one, for Charlie Davis and Marion Covington, Doug Abbott, Robert and Tammy Powell, many others, Lord, who are struggling. Be with our church family here. Help us to reflect your love, your truth to the world we live in. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So now, so a couple weeks ago, I guess this is the third meeting for this class. I started a class that I actually started 18 months ago, 20 months ago, back in March of 2020. I only did it for a couple weeks, and then we stopped meeting for a while, so I decided to wait till now to start the class back. So this class is on a kind of a cultural critique, if you will. It's different from normal classes that I teach, normal classes that we have here, and that we're not going through a biblical text necessarily, but we're going through a theme that I hope will be helpful to us all, that you'll be able to see the spiritual applications, even though, again, this is more of a topical thing and more of just a reflection on what's going on around us in the world and how people are thinking about truth and how people are thinking through issues and various things that we're facing now as a culture, that we as a church might be aware so that we can speak the truth of God to this generation. And so I hope you see the point in all of that. I'll probably give this caveat every week just because I want to make sure there may be people who are listening online or people who are joining us in person who haven't been here before. We're talking a lot about Gen Z, Generation Z in this class. This is not meant to be, and I hope I don't present it that way, certainly not meant to be a condescending kind of thing like, these kids are going to mess up the world, if we don't stop them, that sort of thing. There's always generational tension. It's just the way it goes. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. It's always happened. It's not just something new that started recently. And this is not going to be also like a painting with I probably will paint with a broad brush, but I hope you'll recognize there are many, many exceptions to what I'm going to be teaching you. We're talking about trends. We're talking about big picture stuff. And there are Gen Z people in the room and maybe some online. And when I say something negative about trends, I want you to know that I'm acknowledging every generation has them, and also that not everybody in a generation fits this perfectly. That ought to go. I hope you understand that part of it. So, but we're thinking about things that are going on in the world that are changing the way people respond to and think about Christianity, and so that's one of the main things here, so that we might be equipped. A couple of books that I've used, I put those up there every week. Some different things going on in the world. The epicenter of Christianity shifting from the west to the south, rise of Islam in the Western world, and the questions about how certain extremist forms are going to grow and the kind of impact they're going to have. I talked about the radical redefinition of marriage and family, and we'll come back to that probably periodically through this, because that's a huge change in the last generation, I guess. and it's going to be a huge thing moving forward. What does it mean to be human with the ethics of cloning and various things that are different about our world now? Driving forces, a lot of the changes that we're seeing around us now, the secularization, which has to do with a society that is rooted in and based on, in many ways, Christian thoughts, symbols, artifacts, when it moves from that sort of thing. And I think, regardless of what we want to say about America being a Christian nation, I'd have a bit of a, you probably would too, a bit of a problem with that kind of depiction because of various factors. But I think we do recognize that because of the history of this country, there have been a lot of Christian influences and a lot of artifacts and thoughts and even the language that we speak and a lot of things that we can assume people know simply because they live in America and the background of America with Christianity, right? That's changing drastically. And so it's as our nation ages, as the greatest generation decreases in number, Gen Z is already the most populous generation. As it keeps increasing, its influence is felt more and more. You're going to see this trend towards secularization that we're already seeing. It's going to pick up steam. Privatization is a consequence of secularization. That is, that you are supposed to, it's okay for you to have religious beliefs, but you keep them private. Don't bring them into the public sphere. Pluralization is that every alternative, many truths with lowercase t is no big T truth. So there are a lot of different ways of viewing truth. You've got your way, I've got my way. Let's keep them all separate. They're all equal, and one ought not have priority over the other. And so, it was a kind of assumed, for good or ill, that in the public sphere, often the Christian way of talking about something, viewing something, would have more influence than non-Christian ways. That's no longer expected to be true as we become more and more pluralized. Generation goes and a generation comes. It's very important for us to be aware and to reflect on what that means for us. Those born from that number there, actually 1996 is the one I'm using for this class. 1996 to 2010 is about a little over a quarter of the population, most populous generation of all. And so 40% of consumers are in Gen Z, and that's why marketing is geared toward them. Okay, now here's some things. We've already talked about these. We looked, if you remember last week, we looked at some different things that had an impact on the various generations, from the Depression of the 1930s to World War II in the 1940s, to the post-war boom in the 1950s, to Korea and Vietnam in the 1950s and 60s, to civil rights movement in the 1960s, to the hippies, questioning authority in the 1960s, what in the 70s, big skepticism toward government, Watergate, early 70s, the PC coming about and entering into, I don't know when the first PC was invented, but I know in the 80s is when it started really being, as far as most homes, got one. I guess the 80s, wasn't it? And then you've got the Cold War. I skipped over the Cold War in the 1950s and 60s. And so you got all these things: materialism, increasing prosperity. What else? Moving ahead in our timeline here, 1990s. What happened in the 1990s? A lot of economic success in the 1990s, and then of course you've got 9/11, 2001. You've got the invention of the internet. Skipped over the internet, and really became what I guess the 1990s is when the internet started. I remember when I first heard of people getting online. I didn't even know what it was. That was 1995. I remember hearing people going on chat rooms or something and I was like, what are they talking about? I played Pong on my Commodore 64 or whatever. Probably not in 1995. And then America Online, AOL. Remember that? You guys remember that in the mid 1990s? I remember my first account with AOL was $4.95 a month. And remember the 2400 baud modem that you could get on and hear the noise, and it locked in for $4.95 a month. We got 5 hours, I think. I think you got 5 hours. That was 1995, 1996. Anyway, so a little nostalgia there. And then 9/11, you had the recession of '08 and '09. You have the invention of the iPhone in '07. And then you have the omnipresence of smartphones and tablets. I guess, iPhone was kind of like, the first one that had a huge influence, but then moving beyond that in the late first decade and then on into the second decade, and now we know the way it is now. So a lot of these factors influenced every generation, and I think it's important for us all to acknowledge we are in some ways a product of our upbringing. We're a product of the world we were brought up in. Can't avoid that. Good or bad, can't avoid it. What we can do is be self-reflective about it and to think, especially when we're in conflict or we're struggling in some way, to be reflective and to think, what is it about the world in which I was raised, my culture, my generation, what is it that's influencing me to think this way? And why do I not see this like my parents? Why do we not see it like our grandparents? Why do my kids see this differently? Our grandkids, why are they so different? And for us to ask questions as to what are these various factors that have shaped us. So one of the shaping factors for the youngest generation is the recession of '08, '09. They don't remember, I guess they may remember vaguely some of the older ones, but 9/11 and the war against terror and all of that in the early 2000s. But one of the biggest things that they do remember, and they've always kind of lived with this kind of awareness, is that the uncertainty of the economy that really came to the forefront in the late first decade of the 2000s. Yeah. That's true. That's a good one. When did that start, I wonder? 24-hour, 24/7 news cycle. I don't know how long that's been around. Yeah. Early 2000s, was it? When Fox and CNN and MSNBC. What was that? Okay. Were they 24/7 that far back? 1970s? Yeah. I wonder. And I guess, going back that far, how many, well, yeah, I don't know. I know that it has become like probably available to the masses, or at least most people having, either cable or satellite access to 24/7 news cycle in recent days, last 20 years. I don't know. Y'all look that up, let me know. But certainly that's had a factor, just the accessibility of information. Good or bad, good information, bad information. We'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. So Wi-Fi enabled, the millennials were the ones that were called like the digital natives. They've always been, it's always been a kind of a part of their lives, but Gen Z is the first generation that really doesn't remember a world, not that they always had a phone or a tablet necessarily, but they don't really remember a world where you did not have access to 24/7 information in your pocket or purse or whatever, with the availability of, smartphones and tablets. So screenagers are sometimes called iGen. It's just kind of Wi-Fi has been access to information wherever you are at all times. 91% of Gen Z go to bed with their phones beside them. And so it's, I think we have no idea the implications of that. I really don't. I think we're starting to get an idea of what this does to the psyche. And Steve Jobs, when he introduced the iPhone in 2007, in his inimitable way, he had no clue what it was going to do. No clue. Just what did he say at the time? It was like a combination. It was going to combine the iPod. It's going to combine the music of the iPod, phone, and what was the third thing? Seems like I remember there were three things, but basically music and talking, right? And wasn't that it initially in 2007? I think. Oh, a camera, yeah. So. And then the implications of that are far-reaching. We won't know them for years and years. Some of the things that go along with, you probably read some about this, the anxiety, uncertainty, problems with anxiety. If you look at this across generations, it is more of a problem among younger people in our country now. And who knows why exactly? I think we can speculate. People talk about the recession, and there's been kind of this uncertainty. They've grown up with this tension in the world, with various countries, communism, radical versions of Islam, and then economic uncertainty, leading to I think a lot of us who are older were amazed at how many of the younger generation support versions of socialism. You've seen that in the 2016 election, saw it in 2020 election, and before that, but especially then, and you wonder, why is that? And it has to do with a generational thing. It's not just, I think sometimes there's a tendency for older people to say, well, it's just, you're young and immature or whatever. Well, there's certainly an age thing to it, but probably deeper than that, it is the experiences that younger people have had and the uncertainty of our system and how it hasn't worked perfectly, and it's created kind of the skepticism toward capitalism among some who are younger. At least, just thinking about it. So there's been this anxiety and uncertainty. The millennials grew up to a great extent on the triumph of good over evil, as demonstrated like the Harry Potter series, and as I mentioned to you last week, I think, characterizing a younger generation is the uncertainty about the future, as you see in Divergent and Hunger Games. Yeah. So it's not so much that good is going to triumph over evil as it does in Harry Potter, but rather, what's the future look like? Looks like dystopia, uncertainty, chaos, all that. So reflecting kind of the anxiety of the times. I think that's fascinating to think about. So all right, we didn't talk about this last week, and so the book I was trying to remember last week, and I couldn't recall the name of it, is the Coddling of the American Mind. And so I know some of you have read the book, and if you haven't, I'd encourage you to read that book as soon as you can. Fascinating. Coddling of the American Mind, written by Jonathan Haidt, and I can't remember his co-writer, but Haidt is a smart dude. He's a secular guy. But this is a fascinating look at some trends. And one of the things that he points out in this book, though, he would, I think probably by all of us in here, he would characterize himself this way, as a liberal in so many ways. It is fascinating to hear his study of these trends that have created this kind of thing, especially on college campuses now, where, again, I hope you don't hear me painting with too broad of a brush here, because there are many, many exceptions to this, but on college campuses, the creation of safe spaces where anything that you say, almost anything that you say, someone might characterize as hate speech. Now, I want you all to hear what I'm saying here, because I'm not saying there's not such a thing as hate speech, only that it has gotten to, in many circles, to a ridiculous point where you cannot even engage in public discourse where you have differing opinions about certain things without some people being offended and not being able to handle it. And so colleges, universities have created these safe spaces where you can retreat, and you can find this place where nobody's going to disagree with you. Where you're not going to have to hear that kind of talk. And Haidt in that book points to the very reason we have universities is, especially secular universities, but I would make the same case that it ought to be true of Christian universities as well, is for there to be the gathering of various opinions so that these opinions are given free course and you can judge them based on their merits, where one, because it doesn't fit with a dominant narrative, that it's just silenced and canceled and isn't heard at all. So there's this, speculation about why this is the case. And who knows exactly why it is the case, but it is the case, and it's a scary thing when in a secular society you can't have conversations about many things. And so, safe spaces, that's a kind of phenomenon of recent years. I think I'm going to say more about that in this next point I want to make. I'm kind of combining some different, I don't think that came out of I don't remember which book that came out of. Jonathan Haidt, that book I think is fascinating. By the way, you take this into religious places as well. It's not just a kind of a liberal thing, it's a conservative thing, it's a religious thing as well, in that we can create a kind of environment where we can't have honest disagreement about some things, even religious discussions. And that's not healthy either, when we just cancel or silence a view because it disagrees with some sort of dominant narrative. It's not a healthy kind of environment. Okay, I'm going to come back to that safe spaces thing in a minute, because when we talk about like ways of parenting in recent years, what about diversity? This Gen Z is the most racially diverse generation ever. It's about almost 50% non-Caucasian. Gen Z is. The next most diverse generation is the millennials. They're about 44% non-Caucasian. There's huge demographic change in our country, one that we ought to be aware of. I found this interesting. Since the early 1700s, the most common last name in the United States was, you can probably guess it, Smith. Now it is Rodriguez. That is a change in recent years, signifying changing demographics in America. And you think about that growing up in that kind of world, Gen Z growing up in a world that is as diverse racially. Okay, I think that's almost about that. So these are just observations, right? Okay, let's talk about this one now. Sexually fluid. And I've wrestled a lot with, not only how to talk about this, but if we even need to speculate on why it is the case. And probably we will do a little of that. But you guys probably know members of Gen Z are by far the most likely to say that they have friends who are of a different sexual orientation. 59% of them versus 53% of millennials, and going down as you go. Let me just read a paragraph or so here. The accepting nature of Generation Z leads to strong support for such things as gay marriage and transgender rights. They're coming of age in the era that has put such things in the mainstream, such as in 2015, when the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage, and former Olympian-turned-reality TV star Bruce Jenner very publicly became Caitlyn Jenner. Indeed, according to the Northeastern University study, the question of same-sex marriage is decisively settled for them, with 73% in favor. Notably, they also support equal rights for transgender people in high numbers, 74%. For Gen Z, the idea of acceptance, listen to this. For Gen Z, the idea of acceptance is often interchangeable with the idea of affirmation. Okay, so let's unpack that just a little bit. Two things I think I want to mention here, well, maybe three. One is just briefly, this is not, like if we're talking about the legalization of same-sex marriage, it's certainly not Gen Z's fault. Happened in 2015, and the trends were there long before that, of course. It's not Gen Z's fault. But it is the world they're growing up in. And because of that, there is this, not only, there's this, as that last quote mentioned, there's this graying or blending together of acceptance and affirmation. And this is, we'll have time to reflect on this in coming weeks, but That's a dangerous thing when a society gets to a point where it says that in order to respect someone, you have to accept and affirm the choices that they've made. And that has enormous implications for sexuality, as you know. I suspect it's going to get more like that as time goes on. One of the things here, and this is, I guess, speculating about why it's the way that it is we have become a society that takes individualism to its inevitable end when it's divorced from a Christian context. I think I shared with you something I got from, I don't remember where it was, some years ago, that America is a cut flower civilization. And I don't remember who said that, but what he meant by that was that there are so many things that are embedded in the American system that come from Christianity. But those things, well, let me pause there just for a second. One of those being the value of the individual. You may know that historically and in non-Western cultures, the individual often hasn't been valued as much as, like, the community, for example. The community has value over the individual. You still go to some, like particularly Asian cultures, and you'll have the community being valued over the individual. One of the products of Christianity has been that every person is of infinite value, created in the image of God, all that. So individualism found its way into, not that it didn't exist before, but certainly it was a very important factor in Western societies. The value of the individual. The cut flower civilization idea, though, is that you take some of those principles that are an important part of our society, you cut them off from their foundation, which is Christianity, and the value of the individual because every person is created in the image of God. You separate those two, and then individualism can morph into a kind of way of viewing the world that is non-Christian. And so we find ourselves at this point with individualism. I think we all like individualism. We believe that every person is created in the image of God and has infinite value. We believe in the right to choose, right? I'm not talking about abortion now. I'm talking about just in general. We believe that in the individual's right of choice, self-determination. All those are connected to individualism. You separate that from Christianity, however, and it morphs into this thing to where we believe that every individual can choose anything so long as, usually we'll put this in there, so long as it doesn't hurt someone else. The way that affects sexuality, I think you can probably, connect these dots. The way that has worked itself out in recent days is that how dare any of us say that an individual can't choose his or her gender, regardless of the biology. I can't tell you that you can't choose your gender. Nobody can choose that for you. Right? You see, individualism, this right of individual choice, when it is divorced from certain limiting factors that are inherent in Christianity, it develops into what we see now. Gen Z is feeling that more than any generation. But again, like the recent stuff, you can't put off on them because it was the older generations that kind of codified this thing, right? It's the world that they're growing up in. So individualism is like a god. And so you talk to someone under 20 about transgenderism, homosexuality, same-sex marriage, the whole LGBTQIA. How can any of us tell them what they are or what they should do sexually? You see? So we'll reflect on this more, but I just want us to think a little bit about where it comes from and why we see it. And so we kind of see the consequences of years including every generation in here, years of taking steps toward this deifying of the individual into the present manifestation of that deification of the individual. I hope, is that making sense at all? Y'all got thoughts or questions? Can't tell if I'm communicating that in a way that makes sense or not.
So how can you tell an innocent person from an ordinary person,
George, I want to hold off on talking about that right now. That's a good question. All right, we will talk more about like sexuality and some of that later, though this isn't going to be a class on that per se. Right now, I really just want to think about like why this came to be and an observation that it is, you know, and later we're going to reflect on how we as Christians might be able to influence in good ways, you know, a culture that has these presuppositions. So, okay. So we'll come back to that. Hope you guys will just think about it. Let me know if you disagree or have more insight or whatever. Okay. So this is a fascinating one. Haidt talks about this in his book as well, about a changing in parenting over the last 30 years or so. You guys remember John Walsh and his son Adam Walsh, 10 years old, I think. Adam was 10 years old when he was abducted at a Sears in Hollywood, Florida. And his mother had taken him to Sears, and he and some other guys were looking at the Ataris, the Atari 2600s. And she went off to do something. She came back, and he was not there. And the boys were gone, and security guard had said a scuffle broke up, and security guard had made them leave the store. Anyway, Adam was apparently abducted, and severed head was found 2 weeks later. Just an awful, awful thing. And John Walsh, Adam's father, went on to create the television program, America's Most Wanted? That was it, right? And, you know, this is an interesting thing. Just think about this. If you haven't heard this before, at least just reflect on this a little bit. That was in 1984. Yeah, because Adam was born in 1974. That was in 1984. The show came out sometime after that. There was a significant change. That show was enormously popular, created. Now, I'm sure it did a lot of good, and you may remember there were people found, you know, as a result of that show and all that. But some of the other things that show did is it created this kind of feeling in America that your kids are unsafe. And it changed the way parents parented. I say it like it's not the only factor. I'd be overstating it drastically, the influence of that show. But there was a significant change in that time of the way parents parented. Now, you guys, you know that it's changed over time, and you know, we could talk about back when I was a kid, you know, that sort of thing. I don't want to do that necessarily, but I do want to make the observation that things have changed, and some of it is because of this growing fear in America that your kids are unsafe if they're unattended. Kind of creating this, you know, the helicopter parents. You know, I'm going to keep them here. I'm always going to know where they are. I'm always got to keep my eyes on them, that sort of thing. And there is some pretty good evidence, I think, that kind of overprotection has led in recent generations to a kind of protection that kept kids from developing a level of independence that previous generations did. And I had a thought I was going to share with you about that. You know, playgrounds changed, everything changed. It's all about safety and all that. And I think all of us are pro-safety, right? We want our kids to be safe. And I'm not suggesting that those of you who are parents of young kids, you just need to turn them loose necessarily. But I do think we need to reflect on the opportunity we have as parents to give our kids opportunity within certain boundaries to face against difficulty, to get hurt a little bit, and to learn to deal with the world in certain ways. And we've all failed in certain ways on that, of course, either too much or not enough. I think where we are now, and you may disagree with this, but where we are now is that we are in many ways overprotective when it comes to physical things. So we really don't want them getting hurt. We're overprotective. Some are overprotective when it comes to protecting our kids emotionally. And we are underprotective when it comes to protecting their hearts and their minds. Because what we've done, it seems, again, this is a broad generalization here, but I think what we've done is we got this feeling that our kids are physically unsafe. And by the way, the data shows that kids are now safer than they've ever been. I don't know if you know, the chances of their getting abducted are incredibly low. But anyway, it doesn't mean I'm telling you to turn your kids loose, you know. But we've got this kind of environment now where we protect them physically to an extreme. We protect them emotionally. Don't you dare talk to my kid that way. Oh, did so-and-so talk to you badly at school? Oh, I'm going to call the teacher. You know, that sort of thing, like this overprotection. Again, all of us are against bullying, but there's some sort of balance there in our raising our kids and helping them to develop the ability to be independent and to see, you know, the influences that are in the world. And then as far as the mind and the spirit are concerned, sometimes we turn them loose. We are almost out of time. I want to finish this, but I want to read you something here that's fascinating to me. As one father described his parenting world, after ensuring that his 6-year-old daughter was on the family iPad, his 8 and 11-year-old sons were on the PlayStation, and his 2-year-old was watching something on his iPhone. For me, he says, this was a good morning's parenting. There had been no arguments, and I had been able to read the papers in peace. To his thinking, any other way of parenting just isn't realistic. Why? The world has moved on. Since it's not always safe to let children venture outside, where they might run or play or use their imagination, children simply have to spend more time in front of a screen. Granted, the author continues, they could go outside or engage in reading, but such an endeavor invariably involves parental supervision, and that is a limited resource. So technology comes to the rescue, offering parents a way to occupy their children that does not involve direct parental supervision. As one pediatrician remarked about the time children spend on screens, quote, "It is time to stop arguing over whether it was good or bad and accept it as part of children's environment." There's a ton that ought to be said about this. Various statistics you probably already know. I want to... No, I don't want to rush through that. What's happened is, and I'm just repeating what I've already said, but tagging something on the end of it is, along with the protection of them physically and emotionally, and the underprotection of them in spiritual ways, and their mind, what they take in, has created a generation that in some ways has matured more slowly, and in other ways has matured too quickly. This phrase, growing older, younger, having to do with the kind of mature and adult themes that children are often exposed to now, because they're often granted access to this thing that gives them anything in the world, and they're not ready for it. I know we did this, you do this, you parents do this now. You put filters on there. You know, whatever you use to filter, and I do hope you're using something. But even within those filters, our kids have told us things that they were, even with we have filter on our Wi-Fi at home, that restricts not only hours, but also, various levels of content and all that. And our kids have told us things that they saw. You can't, you think you're doing a good job, and you realize, oh wow, And so it's kind of scary that like sexual themes and violence and various kinds of things that people in previous generations were not exposed to. First, the average age a kid is exposed to pornography is 11 now. 75% of 17-year-old guys are viewing pornography regularly. These are the facts of the world we live in. And that has created something. I think we don't have any idea the implications of this. And we're out of time. I want to pick up that we're going to make a big segue next Wednesday in stopping as much of the analysis part and going on to thinking about, okay, that's it. So what do we do? What is a response? What is a Christian response? What does the Bible have to say to us in the church, and us as parents and church leaders in thinking about what we do? And I hope you'll be thinking about it, praying about it, and I hope that it'll be helpful as we. This is going to be a class that lasts for a few weeks, and every week I feel like, I need to get to the next part, and we're getting there, but we just I wanted to cover some of this stuff first. Let me pray, and then we'll be done for tonight. Father, thank you so much for blessing us with this chance to reflect on some things going on in the world. Lord, you know all things. We are finite. We don't understand things, Lord, but it scares us when we look around at the world and the way it's becoming, and it scares us for our kids and grandkids, and think about what they're exposed to and the kind of world they're going to grow up in. And Lord, we know you're in control, and we just pray that you'll help us as a church, help us as church leaders, help us as parents and grandparents to be wise, to be faithful, and to, particularly to the extent that we have influence over a generation behind us or generation or two behind us, that we will do what's right so that we will ensure we can share the gospel with our kids and grandkids, and they will be receptive and they'll turn their hearts toward you. We thank you so much in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you so much.